Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to this evening's Zoom Into Nature, the Land Conservancy's evening webinar series that covers a wide range of nature topics from flying squirrels to tiger beetles to Ohio's native orchids. Tonight, we welcome Dr. Risa Pesapane for her program Bite-Sized Science, all about ticks and how to stay safe. I am Renee Barranca, the Director of Conservation, Education, and Outreach at Western Reserve Land Conservancy. At the Land Conservancy, I develop virtual and in-person programming for people of all ages. I'm fortunate to be able to host our field trips within the network of conservation properties that the Land Conservancy has protected in Northeast Ohio, which totals over 80,000 acres of natural landscapes, family farms, and urban green spaces. I research topics for this series based on questions I receive from members. Aside from the infamous question, what can I plant in my yard that deer won't eat? I receive lots of messages about dealing with ticks. Over the last couple of years, we've all noticed an increase in the number of ticks, and most of us do a routine tick check when we come in from the outdoors. Tonight, Risa will cover basic tick biology, seasonal activity, and the distribution of Ohio's common species. She'll explain how best to protect against tick bites in people and pets, and what to do if you're bitten. As always, please remember to place your questions in the Q&A section at the bottom of the screen, and we will spend time at the end of her program tonight covering your questions. It's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Risa Pesapane. Dr. Pesapane is an associate professor with a joint appointment between the Department of Veterinary Preventative Medicine and the School of Environment and Natural Resources at The Ohio State University. Her research focuses on the impact of ticks and mites on human and animal health, understanding the ecological drivers of tick abundance and disease transmission, as well as interventions for managing ticks and mites. Risa is also the director of the Buckeye Tick Test, a tick pathogen testing service lab for contracted partners and the public. I'm sure we'll learn more about that tonight. And welcome, Risa.
Thank you so much for having me tonight, Renee, on this really cool program. That was such a great welcome, and thank you to everyone listening from near and far, apparently.
Mhm.
So I'm going to go ahead and share my slides, and then during my talk, I'm going to go ahead and turn off my camera so I'm not a distracting floating head for everyone. But I'll be sure to turn that back on when we have time for questions.
Okay.
All right, so all right. Well, let's get started. So, why are we talking about this today? I'm sure all of you are here because you've probably encountered ticks, but at a larger level, I wanted to address kind of what's being seen nationally. So, this is not something that is unique to Ohio. This is something that's happening across the United States. And what we're seeing is a pretty dramatic change in tick distribution and tick-borne disease. So, a lot of this alarm came about around 2018 when there was a paper that came out that really evaluated the number of tick-borne disease cases for the previous decade and saw that pretty much tick-borne disease cases had doubled in the United States. And this is due in part to a number of things, but especially because the ranges or the places we find these ticks have been rapidly expanding in the United States. And as that's been happening, they're of course bringing their pathogens along with them. Also, we're seeing a change in our climate in that, a lot of you probably know we have kind of warmer, earlier spring seasons. We might stay warmer longer into the fall, and we might have fewer frost days in the year. And so, what's happening is there are more of those days that ticks are actively questing, perhaps more days that we're out enjoying the lovely weather with shorts and sandals, and we're encountering tick bites. We've also had the introduction of some exotic ticks to the United States that are something we're going to talk about today. And there are, of course, new pathogens that have emerged as challenges resulting from tick bite. So all of these things together have resulted in quite a large increase in the number of tick-borne disease cases in the United States. And I want to stress that this is a problem everywhere, but it's especially a problem in states that didn't have a long history of a lot of tick-borne disease. So Ohio is one of those states. We're going to talk a little bit about kind of historically versus now. But there are other regions in the US, like the New England area, that at least for multiple generations has been aware of tick-borne disease because of Lyme disease and has public health infrastructure and education, some vector control things built in. But in areas where this is an emerging problem, we don't have that long-standing kind of cultural awareness and we don't have the infrastructure in place. So when ticks are emerging in those areas, it can be especially problematic, and you see high spikes in tick-borne disease cases. So this is a loose graphic. This is not the exact distribution. I'll show you the real distribution maps later, but it's just for context to kind of show what has changed. So maybe 25 years ago now, the most common tick that you would have encountered across the state of Ohio is our native tick. It's fairly ubiquitous, the American dog tick. It's kind of brown and has that kind of white coloration, and you can encounter it in any county in the state in the right habitat. But somewhere around the early 2000s, we started seeing more and more Lone Star ticks. And in general, this tick is expanding kind of northward in the United States. And so it's very common where in the counties where it's abundant in the southern half of the state, and you can find it in many counties within the state, but it's still most abundant in the south. And then the black-legged tick, or sometimes called the deer tick, has really kind of been expanding into Ohio from multiple areas. But there's been a strong kind of westward expansion of this tick across the state. And perhaps a couple of ticks that you may not have heard of. We do have two other kind of newer ticks to the state of Ohio in the past 5 to 10 years, and that is the Gulf Coast tick. If you look at this little picture I have above, you can see it's actually very, very similar looking to the American dog tick. And this tick was historically found within a couple hundred miles of the Gulf Coast, which is why it got that name. But it has very rapidly expanded its range in the United States, and it does transmit pathogens we're going to talk about in a minute. So some small populations identified of this tick in Ohio so far. And then there's the exotic Asian longhorn tick. So this tick was introduced to the United States perhaps as early as 2010, perhaps multiple times. It is found in various parts of the world. It's originally from parts of Asia, but it is really problematic, and we'll talk about how that came to be a little bit later in this talk. But it is new and it is expanding within the state as well. So essentially, the landscape went from kind of one medically important tick, the American dog tick, to now having five medically important tick species in the state in a matter of about 25 years. I always make a little note here, brown dog ticks. I don't map them because you don't typically encounter them out in the world, out in nature. They are typically associated with human structures and kennels, so they can be found anywhere that people and dogs are found. So they certainly come up on rare occasions in Ohio, but they're not something you're going to encounter out in the world. So each of these tick species has a laundry list of outcomes for humans and animals that are not favorable to their health. And so the ones I'd like to highlight here that we're going to talk the most about are what we call the big three. So the American dog tick, the black-legged tick, and the Lone Star tick. And these are called the big three because they disproportionately represent the majority of human health cases, and even companion animal cases as well. So the American dog tick, the one we're familiar with. Do I have a pointer? Let's see. Here we go. So this tick here, this is the one we know of as transmitting Rocky Mountain spotted fever. So that can be something that infects both humans and dogs. And then the black-legged tick is the one most people are most familiar with, and it is the most problematic for public health and companion animal health. And that's because it is the only species that can transmit the bacteria that causes Lyme disease. Lyme disease can infect humans, dogs, horses, and even rarely cats. It also transmits anaplasmosis, which similarly can affect humans, dogs, and horses. And there are a few other less common diseases that it causes as well. Next in line in terms of how common it is would be human babesiosis. We have had at least one case of human Powassan virus now in Ohio as well. The Lone Star tick is a very aggressive human biter, and it can cause human and canine ehrlichiosis. And probably the thing you've heard most about it is about mammalian meat allergy, which is alpha-gal syndrome. And we're going to talk a lot more about that later on. But this is the allergy to red meat. And then there's the Asian longhorn tick. Again, we'll talk more about that. But this tick so far essentially affects only livestock in the United States, and it transmits the agent that causes bovine tyleriosis and can cause pretty severe anemia because of how many feed at a time. And I mentioned this new Gulf Coast tick. It does cause a type of human spotted fever, so it's very similar to Rocky Mountain spotted fever, but typically less severe of a disease. So it's hard to differentiate the two, but it is less severe, but it can still cause this spotted fever, and it can cause canine hepatozoonosis, which hepatozoan is the name of the blood parasite. So it's a mouthful, but it can cause disease in humans and dogs. So all of these ticks, you can see each kind of transmit their own special type of pathogens that cause certain diseases. And you'll see, hopefully in this talk, that that's why it's important to know what tick bit you to help with this differential diagnosis. So I will talk about this new tick as well. So let's all make sure we're on the same page though with basic tick biology. There's really cool things about ticks. Well, I think it's cool. Hopefully y'all are excited about some of this stuff too. But first of all, there are some really interesting things and common misconceptions about tick biology. So first of all, there are four technical life stages. So we have eggs, larvae, nymphs, and adults. And only the adult stage has a sex characteristic, so males and females. Um, and I like to sometimes call them baby ticks, teenage ticks, and adult ticks to make it easier. But importantly, for each of those life stages, larva, nymph, and adult, they're only going to feed one time per life stage. And that blood meal is very important. And it is days long, typically, for them to become full or become replete, as we say. And they're going to expand and change dramatically in appearance during that time. And they rely on that one meal to carry them through to molting to the next life stage and surviving to the next season, to molt into that next life stage and seek a host the next time. And importantly, when they are seeking a host, they do something called questing or host seeking. And I'm going to show you a video for what that looks like. But they're really only ever on low-lying vegetation. They are not falling from trees. They are not jumping. They're not flying. They're not hopping. They actually cannot move very far at all on their own. Usually no more than 3 to 30 meters maximum. And that's dependent on species. So they're not moving very much on their own. They really rely on hosts for that. And the cues that they might respond to for that questing behavior are complicated, but primarily based on the detection of CO2. So as you breathe out and walk through a space, they sense that there's a host nearby. And when they are inactive certain times of the year, and it depends on the life stage for when they're active or not, they go through something called diapause or dormancy phase. And this is typically what happens after they've fed and they're going to molt into the next life stage, or when they become inactive over winter for some species. We call that diapause. Importantly, very importantly, we're going to talk more about this, but some species are active all year round, meaning you have a risk year round of being bitten by a tick and getting a tick-borne disease. Importantly, when they're feeding, as I mentioned, if you can imagine just taking one blood meal per life stage, 3 total meals in your whole life, that meal is so important and it's so slow for them to take in enough blood that they have evolved really specialized compounds in their saliva that are specifically designed to make it hard for you to detect that a tick is there and biting you. And they also help increase that blood flow to make sure they're able to get that meal. So when people are like, "Man, I just had no idea that tick was there," that's intended, right? Like that is part of the evolutionary design of this very successful arthropod. So let's learn a little bit more about how ticks feed. I'm going to play you all a video. I'm going to skip to here.
Their bites can transmit bacteria that cause Lyme disease. and other things that can make us very sick. Protected by these palps is a menacing mouth, covered in hooks. First, she has to find a host. She can sense animals like us by the carbon dioxide we give off. She reaches out with her front legs. Scientists call this questing. It will use that claw to latch onto something, like your sleeve. Now you see her. Now you don't. Once aboard, she searches out a nice spot to bite into for blood. She lives 3 years, but in that time, she only eats 3 meals. A tick needs enough blood to grow from larva to nymph, nymph to adult, and then for females to lay their eggs. Gross. Let's check out a nymph, a young tick. It's tiny, smaller than a freckle. To grow into an adult, it needs 1 blood meal, a big one. The front of its body is all mouth. It digs into us using 2 sets of hooks. The hooks wriggle into the skin. They pull our flesh out of the way and push in this mouth part, the hypostome. Those hooks anchor the tick to us for the long haul, like mini harpoons. While the speedy mosquito digs in, sucks our blood, and splits, all within seconds. A tick nymph stays on for days. 3 days if we don't find it before then. Compounds in their saliva help blood pool under the surface of our skin. The nymph sips it through its mouth parts, like drinking from a straw. When a tick is full, and I mean completely full, it falls off wherever it may be. Maybe onto your bed. That's if you don't nab it first. You might have heard that you should twist or burn the tick. Not true. Grab the tick close to your skin and just pull straight out. That's how you win the fight against those tenacious hooks.
All right. Okay, so now that everyone's probably wriggling and itching a little bit, I hope you have a better idea of how ticks feed. And really importantly, I want to emphasize what you kind of saw towards the end there, and that is how different a full tick that's fed on blood looks from the unfed stage. And I really have to stress this when I do outreach because, uh, we often educate people about the way ticks look unfed. Usually it's the adult life stage and the adult females. So this is an adult black-legged tick or deer tick. And a lot of people learn, okay, it's got that reddish body. But you see what happens as this adult female feeds over several days. Now she's this gray, completely discolored, disfigured blob. So sometimes people will say to me, oh, I wasn't that worried, Dr. P, because it was a big gray squishy tick. It wasn't that red black-legged tick, right? So I really want you to leave this talk understanding that the color can be very unreliable. So while it's good to know if you can tell which tick it is, please don't discard it, assuming that it's not a tick of concern because it doesn't look like some of the ticks in the materials you've seen. And there are similar charts out there for the other different tick species, but just to know that a lot of them kind of change color and shape. And some of those features will distort a lot when they have fed on blood. So let's talk a little bit more about the tick life cycle. And we're going to use black-legged ticks as an example for this. And the center of this graph, or this image, you can kind of discard. It's basically just showing there's 2 years with different seasons. But importantly, we have this egg stage, and the eggs are laid in those masses like we saw in the video, and then they're all going to hatch relatively around the same time. And when those larvae emerge, they're typically uninfected. So there are not very many pathogens that are what we call vertically transmitted from mother to offspring, but there are some. But typically, those larval tick bites are less risky than other life stages. So when they take that first blood meal as a larvae, that's an opportunity for them to become infected from usually a wildlife host reservoir that has is carrying a specific tick-borne disease or tick-borne pathogen. So this larvae might typically feed on small mammals and birds, and it's typically mice that the paramyscus mice that are the greatest the best host for the agent of Lyme disease, Borrelia burgdorferi, that could infect that tick. So even whether they got infected or not, they're going to take that blood meal and then they're going to go into diapause and then they're going to emerge again as a nymph. So if they were not infected from that first blood meal they took, they, drank from a host that was not infected, they have a second opportunity when they take this next meal to become infected. So they might feed on, a host that is infected during this life stage. And these nymphs are considered the most risky for the transmission to people because they're so small. So remember, they said it was the size of a freckle. So those nymphs are really hard to identify on your body, and they may have been infected because they've already had an opportunity to take a blood meal. So they're going to have taken the second blood meal, then they're going to go into diapause, and they're going to molt into either an adult female or adult male. So at the adult female stage, that tick has now taken two blood meals, which means they have had two chances to become infected. So we often see like a higher prevalence of infection in that adult life stage. And so they would be a risk to whoever they bite at that phase. So it could be a people or pets or deer or any other animal at that life stage. So this whole process typically takes place across 2, maybe 3 years. So importantly, black-legged ticks, the ticks that can transmit Lyme disease, are the species that are active year-round. So this comes directly from the Ohio Department of Health, and this is kind of the relative abundance or a number of ticks submitted throughout the season of black-legged ticks by their different life stages. So you can see that the first thing that becomes active each year, typically, we have a little bit of adult activity down here in March, April, and that's a hangover as well from the fall. We'll talk about that in a second. But in early spring, we start to see the nymphs become active. So they're emerging. They've had an opportunity to become infected already as larvae, and they're active throughout the summer months when people are active. Larvae are also going to start peaking in late summer and be active, and then the adults come out. And the adults are going to be the ones active in the winter. So a little bit easier to detect on yourself, perhaps, and maybe there's less clothing, you're wearing more clothing, less exposed skin in those winter months. And because they're easier to detect, there might be fewer cases that emerge from those winter months, but there's still a big risk. And those females, remember, have had two opportunities to become infected. So they're usually a higher prevalence. So really importantly, these adults are going to be active in this throughout the winter, any day that it's above freezing at ambient temperature. So this is an actual picture a colleague had taken. They did a tick drag this day on the snow, but the ambient temperature was like 50 degrees. So anytime it's above freezing, like anytime it's in the 40 degrees or more, those ticks will be actively looking for a host. So she found like 12 adult female black-legged ticks questing on this pathway, despite the fact that there's snow on the ground. So that should really stress to you the importance of doing tick checks and being vigilant about tick bite prevention year-round. And I want to especially emphasize these nymphs. I mentioned that this is the riskiest life stage, and you'll see here if we look at the Lyme disease week of onset of illness in Ohio that's reported, we see that really we start to see this picking up really highly in June. And keep in mind that, it takes a couple weeks for symptoms to onset. And if you look back, nymphs become active that first week in May, and they're really pretty peaking really high by this first week of June. And see, we have this really nicely matched graph of cases and illness onset of tick-borne disease that align with that. So they're non-zero at other times of the year because those adult females can be active, but the nymphs are the most directly related to human tick-borne disease cases, specifically Lyme disease cases. So in general, if we take all of the tick species and all of their seasonal activity that we know, Gulf Coast ticks are still really new in Ohio, and we don't know kind of when they emerge or when they become inactive. It's probably roughly March-ish through September-ish. But we do know this information for the other ticks on this list. So if we look at this here, we can kind of draw lines and say, the time of year where you're going to potentially interact with the most and ticks and the greatest diversity of ticks is going to be March through October. Okay, but importantly, again, oh, I was going to say, and this is the time, of course, that we're all like out enjoying nature in our shorts and sandals, and our kids are playing in the grass and the leaves and having a great time. So this is the time of year we need to be really, really thoughtful about doing those preventive measures. But importantly, again, black-legged ticks span the whole calendar. So let's talk a little bit about now this tick-borne pathogen distribution, ticks and tick-borne pathogen distribution in Ohio. And I want you to be able to take away from here, like where to find the current maps for this. I'm going to show them to you, but like if you're an educator or you do outreach of some kind, or you want to reference this for your own needs, you can find these maps. They're publicly available on the Ohio Department of Health page. The QR code here links directly to that page that has the drop down of all of these maps. So go ahead and take a minute, screenshot it, use your phone or whatever to find it, bookmark it. And I also put the URL down here, but you can navigate to the page that has all the maps from their tick page in general. So, and I'll share more of that later in the talk as well. So as we get into tick distribution, I have to start by saying that not all tick species are made the same. There's a lot of variability. So first of all, you're going to see that they vary in their distribution in the state. So just geographically, whatever county you're in, you might have different risks of different ticks. Furthermore, the habitat you're standing in at any point in time can be a different tick species risk. So on the left here, I have showed this tall grass. It's like an open field. There's no overhanging canopy. That's great habitat for American dog ticks, the one we're all so familiar with. Lone Star ticks as well will use this habitat. But black-legged ticks that transmit Lyme disease, they really do not like that open habitat with a lot of sun exposure. You might find them at the edges a little bit, but they primarily are only going to be found in that habitat with canopy, forested areas, leaf litter, and on the edges. All of these ticks also have different host preferences. So we talked about how they're going to take that blood meal at different life stages. They're going to use different animal hosts based on their different life stage. So that impacts what kinds of pathogens they might pick up and transmit to people. It impacts your likelihood of encountering them, and it impacts all sorts of things about their biology. They're going to have very different seasonal activity in some respects as well by those life stages. So I just showed you kind of the core time of year when most of these ticks are active, and that's kind of where we get this idea of it's tick season, because there's a lot of overlap in, all of these species are active at the same time. But again, some of these species are active year-round, like the black-legged tick. They all typically could have like 2 to up to 6 years for their life cycle if it was really drawn out. So different species have different longevity. And of course, they're going to transmit different diseases, which again is why really important we stress knowing what kind of tick bit you, because a lot of these symptoms when you have tick-borne disease present very similarly. So knowing which tick bit you can help your healthcare provider narrow down a diagnosis. So we're going to go through these individually, but this is just kind of a smattering comparison of the adult life stage of each of the tick species I mentioned. So there is quite a lot of difference between the way a female might look and a male might look for some of these species. So especially look at this black-legged tick, like a lot of people familiar with that rust red body of the adult female, but the adult male, is smaller and completely brown. I think my most favorite example of this is a lot of people are very familiar with the Lone Star tick. They'll say, oh, I know that one. It's the one with the white dot. But when we look at the all three life stages or all four types of these, if you include males, the adult female is the only one with a white dot. And you might get bitten by any one of them, but you will only know if it's a lone star if it's the adult female. And you can see again here, look at this comparison between the American dog tick and the Gulf Coast tick. They are very, very similar ticks. The primary difference is these long mouth parts here on the Gulf Coast tick and the very short ones on the American dog tick. And this is probably why this Gulf Coast tick has expanded so quickly without people in the United States noticing as much as maybe a different tick, because they occur in the same habitat and it's very easy to confuse the two if you're not a trained professional. So let's dig in a little bit about the distribution. So if you ever looked at any distribution maps of this tick in Ohio before, the black-legged tick, I think you'll be pretty surprised to see how different it is now. So this tick is found all throughout the eastern and midwestern United States and parts of Canada. It is the only tick that can transmit Lyme disease, and it is found in essentially every county in Ohio. It's like my personal goal to fill in the last, dot on this map. So when I started in Ohio years ago, we only really knew about the eastern half of the state, and it was clear that there was some sufficient habitat in the western part of the state. And so we've been working hard in collaboration with health department agencies and local folks to fill in this map. So Lyme disease is a risk across the entire state of Ohio. An absence of its detection in a county is not an absence of risk. It just means that no one has checked the right wooded area of that county before. So I mentioned they can transmit Lyme disease, the agents of anaplasmosis, babesiosis. There is one rare type of ehrlichiosis that can be transmitted by this tick. We have not had any cases of that in Ohio. There is tick-borne relapsing fever that can be transmitted by this tick, and we have had some cases of that in Ohio, and Powassan virus. So this again is up close what this tick looks like at different life stages. And again, only the unfed adult female has that rust red body. Most people are getting bitten by this life stage. And again, it's the size of a freckle. Or if you can imagine that first image I showed of, the thumbnail, how tiny it is. A lot of people, when they see these, call them seed ticks because they're, smaller than a poppy seed. So next is our American dog tick, or Dermacentor variabilis. This is the one, like I said, it was common and native in Ohio. You can encounter them in every county. And this is the one that is associated with Rocky Mountain spotted fever. There are also some much more rare diseases it can cause in companion animals or wildlife, and in some livestock, but they're pretty rare to see these. So the big one we're concerned about with this tick is Rocky Mountain spotted fever. And here's this tick up close. So again, this is the largest tick out of these. If you were to lay them side by side, it is often the one people might notice crawling on them. A lot of people will find them at the nape of the neck or in the hair, which I think is maybe why people thought that they fell from trees. And that's just part of this tick's desire to crawl up. They like to go to the apex. So they started at your ankles and went all the way up to the nape of your neck before you found them. But this is the tick people are most likely, this and the black-legged tick are the two that people encounter the most in Ohio. So next is the Lone Star tick with the scientific name Amblyomma americanum. The Lone Star tick is expanding in the state as it expands throughout the kind of Midwestern, Northeastern United States. And you can see that it's mostly concentrated in the southern part of the state, but it certainly can be found in any county. And, we're starting to get plenty of records coming from more northern parts of the state. And it does transmit the agents of human ehrlichiosis and canine ehrlichiosis. But in Ohio, the greatest outcome that we see, or the most common outcome we see of these tick bites, is this mammalian meat allergy or alpha-gal syndrome. So in much greater numbers than ehrlichiosis. And we're going to talk more about that. It also can transmit some other diseases or pathogens that cause disease in animals and wildlife. And there are some viruses that this tick is known to transmit in other states. It's very possible that some of these viruses are present here in Ohio, but thankfully, wherever they are, usually it's in pretty low prevalence. So they're usually fairly rare to have cases of that. And again, this is what that Lone Star tick looks like up close. So a lot of people are going to recognize this adult female with that distinct spot. That's actually why got the name Lone Star. It has nothing to do with Texas. Um, and the males actually, you can kind of see it's not just a glare in this photo. They have this kind of shiny aspect to their body as well. But the nymphs and the larvae have no specific coloration. They're just especially round and kind of this yellowy tan color. And they're all of these life stages are very aggressive human biters. This tick is what we call a pursuit tick. So we talked about in that video, the black-legged ticks are kind of lying in wait. We call them ambush ticks. They don't move very far on their own in response to carbon dioxide. They might move at most 3 meters on their own towards, something that they're sensing like a stimuli, like carbon dioxide. But Lone Star ticks are kind of colloquially referred to as hunter ticks or pursuit ticks. These ticks will move up to 30 meters to find you if they sense a host nearby. So they will seek you out in an environment if you are there. That's what we call them very aggressive human biters. And if they're in a space where people are there, you'll often, that's going to be a common species that's submitted for tick bite. Oops. Okay. Um, Somehow my slides kicked around. Okay. So Gulf Coast ticks. I mentioned this is kind of fairly new in Ohio, and this map is reflective of that. And well, it's reflective of a few things. We have evidence of this tick kind of popping up sporadically in a variety of counties, but we really only have 3 counties where it's kind of known to be established. Part of that is because a lot of our surveillance focuses on black-legged ticks and these other ticks that are important because they represent the most human cases. And this tick can be found in some different habitat. So it could be that it's in more parts of the state, and we just don't really understand fully its distribution. But I mentioned that this tick is concerning because it does cause a type of spotted fever rickettsiosis in people, which can be very similar to Rocky Mountain spotted fever, just less severe. And the CDC calls it Rickettsia parkeri rickettsiosis. So it's a mouthful. And it has historically been a problem for livestock because this tick is large and it has big mouth parts, and it can cause a lot of mechanical damage when it feeds in large numbers, like on cattle's livestock ears, and it causes them to droop and swell and causes a lot of irritation, and they get a lot of damage to the hide and can invite secondary infection. So it's been a problem. It's this condition called Gotch ear elsewhere. We don't, as far as I know, we do not have producers in Ohio with problematic Gulf Coast tick infestations causing Gotch ear at this time. So again, if we, harken back to that American dog tick, very similar presentation, just has these really long, big mouth parts that are very painful when they feed. So now let's talk about our exotic tick, the Asian longhorn tick. So currently contained or spreading in the eastern and midwestern U.S. This is where it is in Ohio, as far as we know right now. I'm doing pretty aggressive surveillance and response for this tick. We care a lot about this tick because of how good of a colonizer it is. So when this tick was introduced to the United States, the first detection of it was on a sheep in New Jersey in 2017, which cued a lot of people to kind of examine whether or not it was in their state. And there are some archival records that show that they looked back at their ticks from going back as far as 2010 in West Virginia, that this tick was present. So at least since 2010, this tick has been in the United States. And the reason it's such a good colonizer is because it reproduces asexually or without mating. So a single female introduced to a site, if she survives, will lay 2,000 eggs without having to mate. And all of those 2,000 eggs will be female because it's a clonal species. And every one of those 2,000 will also lay 2,000 eggs. And this pattern goes on. And so you get huge proliferation of populations very easily. So it just takes one tick to start a population. And that's why it's started to spread all over the United States very quickly, as it's being moved around by humans, companion animals, livestock, wildlife, all of the above. Thankfully, so far, it has not been associated with any human or companion animal disease. No clinical cases associated with this tick at this time. And it doesn't seem to be very interested in biting people. It'll happen, but it's, pretty infrequent considering how abundant this tick is in its sites where it occurs. But it is having a huge impact on cattle. So because of that reproductive strategy without having to mate. You get tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, of this tick in a pasture, and they're feeding on cattle literally in many thousands. And so they can cause severe anemia from sheer blood loss in a cow. We have multiple counties where people lost whole cows, like a bull that was found dead in a field because it was essentially became severely anemic just from the number of ticks feeding. Unfortunately, it also brought to the United States with it a particular blood parasite with a mouthful of a name called Tyleria orientalis, which causes tyleriosis. And it's very similar to other blood parasites. So kind of like bovine babesiosis. It causes severe anemia as well, and it can also kill cattle. So it's a big problem for two reasons: in sheer numbers that this tick is feeding, and also this new tick-borne disease to livestock. But again, this is limited to livestock health and not human or companion animal health at this time. So interestingly, I wanted to show you, so on the right is this map of the current known distribution of this tick. And on the left, I pulled this from Ohio State's ArcGIS catalog. You can see this is the cattle beef inventory for the state. So the areas where we have the most cows are also the areas where we have Asian longhorn tick, which is a very bad problem to overlap each other, right? So we are very concerned about this tick for our beef cattle industry in Ohio. Yeah, I think I told you all most of this. Importantly, it has been detected on greater than 30 species of birds and mammals in the US thus far. So I like to say it's currently tasting the buffet of all the new things that it could potentially feed on in this new land that it has found itself on. And the one thing we don't have any real idea of at this time is whether it's going to have an impact on wildlife, right? So it likes to feed on a bunch of mesomammals like skunks, raccoons. It loves deer. It loves any kind of canid. So I mentioned domestic dogs, but coyotes, fox. We don't know if they would feed in large enough numbers to impact wildlife yet. And of course, this is a non-native tick, and anytime you kind of have something new and non-native, wildlife could potentially be sensitive to that. So this is what this tick looks like. It's just a smallish brown, very nondescript tick. Experts typically recognize immediately that it has short mouth parts with this very pointy little bit here. You can see as well, it's pointy here. But it's just plain brown. And you will pretty much never ever see a male. There's only been one documented in the US. And like I said, it's clonal, so they're all females typically reproducing on their own. Yeah, and this is an example. This is one cow that has some large number of them feeding. And as I mentioned, you can get this severe anemia. Importantly, what you can see from severe anemia, it can lead to death, but even if it doesn't, what we see is decreased production. So if these are dairy cattle or general growth, beef cattle, you want them to grow big and strong and muscular, and that's not happening. You can see abortions or stillbirths happen. We've seen that with producers in Ohio. So very problematic, even if they're not transmitting this disease. All right. So I wanted to transition now into talking about Lyme disease in Ohio specifically. I'm going to highlight Lyme disease and alpha-gal because these are the two biggest issues that we see from ticks in our state. So on this map, on the left-hand side, we have the scale for human cases, and on the right, this is the number of seropositive dogs. And we have about 12 years of data here. And so the red bars are human cases, and the gray line is the seropositive dogs. And you can see the first reported established population of the black-legged tick or deer tick in Ohio was around 2010. And each year since then, as that tick has expanded in the state and grown in abundance in its populations, we have seen more and more cases of tick-borne disease in people. In fact, this year, or this past year in 2024, we had something like 1,754 cases, I think it was. And that represents a 47-fold increase, 47-fold increase in Lyme disease cases in Ohio since 2010. And what I like to show about this graph is that this is not just us getting better at detection. It certainly is part of it, but you can see that dog seropositivity mirrors this trend almost exactly. So humans and their companion animals are experiencing a similar effect from this that is clearly representative of this tick's increase in our state. And importantly, as I mentioned at the start of this talk, if you're not in the state of Ohio, this is not unique to where we are. Lyme disease is now the most common vector-borne disease in the United States by a lot, much more than any mosquito-borne disease. And really importantly, the CDC came out with a paper that was saying, there's a lot of reasons why we have difficulty counting cases of Lyme disease. So many layers to this. Where cases either don't go through the full testing because you just treat them, or don't have enough data involved to officially count them as confirmed, and all these layers to diagnostic challenges. So the CDC said the real burden of Lyme disease in any state is probably 10 times what we're able to actually report. So for the state of Ohio with 1,750 some odd cases, this paper would suggest that we should really be thinking it's more like 17,000 people. And that's annually. So the black-legged tick, I mentioned this is the distribution of this tick in Ohio. And now if we look at human cases of tick-borne disease, this is the Ohio Department of Health's map of human tick-borne cases. What you see is the green dots here are the actual cases from 2024. And then in the background, in this kind of tan color, is the incidence over a 10-year period of time. So you can see there's this really strong clustering on the eastern side of the state, even though this tick can be found all over the state. And so what I think is really interesting is if you look at the land use and the type of habitat across the state, the western side of the state is a lot of agricultural property, not a lot of that closed canopy woodland areas that are really important to black-legged ticks. So even though they can be found all over the state, they're not in as high abundance across the state. That is highly variable about like the density of these ticks in different areas. So actually my team, we did a bunch of surveillance across the state and then used this surveillance from across the state to make a model that would predict the abundance of black-legged ticks. And what I really love about this outcome is you can see that where we predicted the highest abundance of black-legged ticks aligns almost, perfectly with where we see high counts of Lyme disease cases in Ohio. And the factors we used in making this model were, like the habitat types, land cover, host community, climatological things together. So importantly, in some parts of the state, greater than 60% of the ticks tested, the black-legged ticks tested, are positive for the bacteria that causes Lyme disease. So more than a 50-50 chance in some parts of Ohio that you would encounter it. So 1 out of every 2 ticks at least you might encounter could be infected. So I think that's important for people to know. I certainly think it might shift people's concern to being more thoughtful about avoiding any tick bites. And then who is getting Lyme disease in Ohio? A lot of variability here. So we have Lyme disease represented across the ages, slightly more male than female, but pretty close to being sex balanced. But wanted to highlight here really importantly, it's a lot of kids. It's our kids who are primarily getting Lyme disease. So ages 5 to 14 in Ohio is the highest risk area or a highest caseload of tick-borne disease. So this is really, really important to think about when your kids are enjoying the outdoors. So I want to run through a little bit of clinical signs. I don't want to get into the weeds too much here, but it's important to me that I share this because I want you all to leave this talk with at least an understanding of like, hey, I should be concerned if I'm seeing the following combination of things. So specifically with Lyme disease, about 3 to 30 days after a tick bite, so notice it could be up to a month that you should be monitoring for these signs. The most common sign that is seen is this red expanding rash called erythema migrans or this quote unquote bullseye rash. But I want to stress that that is not required. It does not happen for everyone. In fact, only about 3/4 of people typically see this any kind of rash at all. And so you can totally get Lyme disease, and it's a clinically accurate diagnosis without ever seeing a rash. And it can be highly variable. You know, the bullseye rash down here on the right, when you see it, it's very clear that's what it is. But look at all this variability. All of these are actual Lyme disease rashes, and they don't look like a bullseye all the time. They can look like a lot of different things and on different bodies, different skin types, different parts of the body. So importantly, don't rule out Lyme disease just because you didn't see that classic bullseye rash. Importantly, it can also be accompanied by kind of flu-like symptoms. So they're like nondescript chills, fever, headache. You get a lot of joint stiffness usually, maybe joint pain. You'll get some swollen lymph nodes, and this is the early stage. I want to stress that if treated early with antibiotics at this stage, most people do recover quickly and completely from Lyme disease. So that is a good thing that we have a treatment modality that typically can resolve Lyme disease, but not always. What happens next is that the bacteria starts to disseminate. So what actually is happening here in this rash is that the bacteria is transmitted into the body, into the skin, and the bacteria is shaped like a corkscrew. It's called a spirochete. It's literally spiral. And it is actually moving through the tissue to disseminate into the rest of the body. And so what happens is once it kind of leaves the initial area of the bite site, 1 to 6 months post exposure, this is when it's starting to disseminate into other parts of your body. You might get additional rashes. You might get some of the nervous system symptoms. One of those is this facial palsy or called Bell's palsy. Most people will report that they're starting to get headaches and more stiffness in those joints. So kind of joint related pain is a very common symptom with Lyme disease. So this spirochete seems to hang out in that those joints. Some people will get problems with memory, concentration, fatigue, and very rarely, some people will experience Lyme carditis. And then we get to the late disseminated stage. So this is, untreated, ongoing infection. It's been months or years since tick bite. Some people can get neurological complaints, so not a large number of patients, so 5%. But again, we do see this arthritis in these untreated patients. So this is, again, this joint association that this bacteria has. And so a lot of people are experiencing joint issues, and some of that damage is permanent to the joints at that point. And this is also where we get into something called post-treatment Lyme disease syndrome, which is basically when people have been treated and the bacteria is no longer in their body, but they are experiencing long-term effects that are still symptomatic from that. And then some people have what's called chronic Lyme disease or refractory Lyme disease, where the bacteria persists and is not being cleared from the body. So importantly, at these later stages, people do still often respond well to antibiotics. So it's not like too late to try that, but there is a greater chance of those long-term challenges and potential permanent damage to the nervous system or joints. I want to mention that animals do also have clinical Lyme disease. So again, mostly dogs and horses. And there's plenty of exposure of companion animals to the agent that causes Lyme disease, but they don't often become clinically ill. So importantly, only around 10% of dogs become clinically ill if they've been infected, according to research data. Dogs typically, they're not going to show clinical signs until 2 to up to 5 months after. So much longer than people. And you're going to primarily see this kind of unexplained lameness is one of the most common signs where veterinarians are like, we've ruled everything else out. Maybe it's Lyme disease. But sometimes you might see fever, anorexia. There might be some of these neurological things that we see in people. Importantly, we see kidney disease that can be associated with long-term Lyme disease, clinical Lyme disease in dogs, and occasionally, in rare cases, that can progress to renal failure. So let's transition to talk about alpha-gal because this is an important new problem that is really emerging in our area, emerging in the United States, and a lot of people and a lot of physicians may not be aware of it. So, importantly, this is an allergy. It is not caused by any kind of pathogen. So, no bacteria, no virus, no blood parasite. It is an allergic reaction. And it's specifically to mammalian meat. So, I say mammal meat because it's not only red meat, pork is also mammalian meat, and specifically following the bite of a Lone Star tick. They're the tick that's most commonly responsible for this. But it's not just meat. There are a lot of medications, cosmetics, vaccines, gelatin, milk products, anything that comes from any of those mammals as well can trigger this allergic reaction. So what it is your body is reacting to something called galactose alpha 1,3 galactose. It's a sugar molecule that is found in all mammals except people. And the short term phrase for this is alpha gal because of how complicated the name is. And what's happening is there is a lot of alpha gal in the saliva of a Lone Star tick. And so what's happening is your body is having an immune response to that sugar molecule. And when I first heard about this and I thought, okay, how is an allergy going to factor into public health, aside from being an irritant? Well, the reason it's becoming so important is because it can be life-threatening. So many people can have such a significant allergic reaction that you get anaphylaxis. So it's actually become the leading cause of adult onset allergy and anaphylaxis throughout the South and the Eastern United States where this tick occurs. So it's not currently a reportable disease that is being petitioned to be changed because it's an allergy. It's not, we don't normally report that. So we don't have hard case numbers because that is how we understand burden. We typically make something reportable and say, this is required that you report this to health departments and we can log it and count it. That is not the case with this. So what scientists have had to do is defer to like hospital records and these other kinds of sources. And they've documented that in 2019 alone, just before this study came out in 2022, that there'd been at least 35,000 clinical cases in the United States. And you can see that Ohio is on this map here. And you can kind of see all this dark blue. This is where there's greater than 87 suspected cases in a county. So the darker the county, the more the burden. And if you look, what the scientists realized was if you look at the overlap of the Lone Star tick distribution and this dark blue, so I'll just do that a couple times for y'all. It's a pretty good match, right? And a lot of people had reported, sure, I had a tick bite not so long ago. And so they're finding that this Lone Star tick is responsible primarily for this. And if you look in Ohio, see the southern part of Ohio has this dark blue. Sure enough, look at where we have the greatest density of our Lone Star ticks at this point in time. So this is a very important emerging issue in Ohio and in the US. The symptoms for it, though, are really all over the map because it's based on individual immune responses. So, some people get rash, hives, some people get GI things like nausea, vomiting, some it's immediately respiratory, like difficulty breathing. You might have random drops in blood pressure, dizziness, severe pain in the stomach. And importantly, the weird thing about this is not like other allergic reactions where it's, within minutes of being exposed, it happens. So what's happening with alpha gal is it takes 2 to 6 hours after consuming a trigger or being exposed to a trigger to have these symptoms onset. So it's actually typically difficult for people to associate, what they're feeling with the trigger. And, people are having lunch or dinner and then waking up in the night with severe anaphylaxis. So 60% of people with alpha-gal experience anaphylactic reactions, and more than a third have cardiac and respiratory symptoms as well. So this is a very serious allergy. And I can't stress enough that this is not about a pathogen that's in some number of ticks. Everything else we've talked about, your risk is dependent upon whether or not that tick was infected. And there's some like natural governing ecological processes that will dictate how many of those ticks are infected. That is not the case with alpha-gal. All Lone Star ticks, even one bite from any Lone Star tick, could technically trigger this reaction in your body. And we have no specific treatments for alpha-gal besides telling you to change your lifestyle, which again, this is not just about diet. It could be about your medical treatment. It could be your cancer treatment regimen. It could be your surgical procedures. It could be your makeup. It could be the gelatin on the strip on your razor blade. You may have to avoid all of these things. So these lifestyle changes and symptom management are really all we can tell people to do right now. And what happens is sometimes it resolves over time for people. Importantly, what they have determined is that the more Lone Star tick bites you get, the worse this reaction is and the longer it will last. However, some people, it just doesn't seem to resolve and they have alpha-gal lifelong. So let's talk now about protecting people and your animals. So I feel like I've probably sufficiently made everyone concerned, which is usually what happens at this point. And I do want to be very upfront about the risks. But I am a lover of nature, and nature is very good for you. It's very healthy for you. We want you to be getting outside. And I can promise you there is a safe and healthy way to do that. So it is my job to send students and people I care about out into the field to very intentionally surround themselves with many thousands of ticks. And I have to ensure that they can do that safely. So trust me when I say that we've collected over 37,000 ticks in my lab, probably closer to 40,000 after today. And we've done that safely without a single tick bite. So what are some things we can do that these things really work? First of all, the kind of low-hanging fruit, we're going to kind of move from least to best. First of all, you're going to want to do those routine tick checks. And on people, that's going to be right after you come in from the outdoors. You want to check all of the little nooks and crannies. Ticks are good at finding those nooks and crannies on people and on pets. So you see this graphic here. It's pretty similar. They're going to be kind of in the armpits, around the tail, around the ears, under the arms, belly buttons, places that they don't expect you to find. And then you're going to want to shower within about 2 hours. So again, if you remember from that video we showed, a tick is not like a mosquito. It doesn't just land on you and immediately bite. It takes quite a long time for that tick to kind of crawl into one of those nooks and crannies. It's got to, move the skin aside. It has to put in the hypostome, and it's going to secrete something called cementum, which is a kind of a clearish substance that looks almost like glue. A lot of people think when they remove a tick that they've removed some kind of skin around it. That's actually the cementum. And it's called that because it helps cement that tick into place in order to do that very complicated feeding. And so it takes quite a lot of time for the tick to do that. So if you shower within 2 hours, you can wash a lot of ticks off before they've really had a chance to properly get in place and start feeding to transmit anything. I tell people, depending if how long the hair is on your pet, You can bring a lint roller. Lint rollers are actually something we use in the field when we encounter very large numbers of ticks that we can't just pick up with tweezers. Lint roller works great for picking up ticks. So you could lint roll yourself, your dog, all that kind of stuff before you get in your car if you've gone somewhere, and you can ensure that you're not bringing ticks home. And then it comes to clothing. This is something I call tick fashion. Hopefully we can, promote the use of long pants and long sleeve shirts. If they're lightweight, I promise you, you will not feel hot. Um, so we tuck your pants into your socks and tuck your shirt into your waistband, and these things just prevent access to your skin. So it's very simple mechanical prevention. If those clothes are light colored, like light colored khaki pants, you're much more likely to see ticks crawling on you. And what my team uses is we treat all of our clothing with permethrin. So if you permethrin treat your clothing with this product, there are many different products out there. The one that I see most often available in like any big box store, Amazon, REI, Walmart, around is this Sawyer permethrin. You can spray your clothes or any of your favorite gear, and then it lasts for 6 weeks or 6 washings. And so that's really useful because you don't have to think about it. And I promise you, this will keep ticks off you or from biting you out in this heavy tick environments. That's what my team uses. There are also clothing you can buy that has this type of product already impregnated in the fabric. So you might see those at some of your big box stores. And then there's also companies online where like if you have your favorite pair of Carhartts or something like that, whatever your favorite garden gear is, hiking gear, you can send it to them and they'll commercially treat it. And each of those lasts much longer than the spray it yourself stuff. So there's options. If you are at a place where the public uses, the facility, you could consider signage. Really importantly, what I talk to a lot of people about is, do you have safety, like occupational health and safety things in place for your people? So if you are an outdoor, any kind of employee or employer of those people, there should be tick bite protection in your occupational health and safety plans. We could say avoid tick habitat, but I find most people I'm talking to have a pretty good reason for why they're in tick habitat. So certainly if you can avoid it, like if you're just doing your normal kind of outdoor hike routine, stay towards the center of that trail to avoid that tick habitat, but if you're a forester or a wildlifer or a birder or anyone working in a park or, a hunter, doing any of the things that we might need to do to go into tick habitat, it's going to be hard to avoid. Importantly, besides permethrin treated clothing, any exposed skin, you could use a repellent. And there's a lot of good repellents out there. Most people are familiar with DEET. There's also picaridin. And wherever I go, inevitably someone's like, well, I'm concerned. I don't really like to use those chemicals, or I don't like the smell of one of these. And that's okay. I promise you that there is a suitable EPA registered effective repellent for every single lifestyle. So I include on here, if you're into botanicals, there is a product that has a tick label claim that uses oil of lemon eucalyptus. It's a commercial high concentration of this, so it's not the same as an essential oil, but it is a completely botanical product. So what I like to tell people is the EPA has this actual website called Find the Repellent that's right for you, and you can look through everything that's registered, what it fends against, like ticks versus mosquitoes, and how long it's protected for. So, some of these botanicals you might need to reapply more often, that kind of thing. But it's there. I promise you, there is no lifestyle that doesn't have a way to stay safe from ticks. So there is a repellent that's right for you. Protecting your pets is also important to protecting yourself. So you want to protect their health, you want to protect your family's health. A lot of these animals, we work very closely with them. They might come in our house, they might sleep in our bed. So you should be talking about preventive products and specifically thinking about them prevention year round. Again, because that black-legged tick is going to be active all year. So unlike fleas or other things that might have a very strong, seasonal limit, these ticks do not. So importantly, you want to talk with your veterinarian about making sure the product you're using has a tick label claim, like it includes ticks. One of the biggest, things is people thought they were on a product. It turns out it's only for fleas. You have to use a stronger formulation usually for ticks. The product you're using should kill the ticks quickly or prevent their attachment, right? Because they're going to transmit if they have an opportunity to attach for a certain amount of time. Some products are only labeled for certain species of ticks. So knowing kind of which ticks are in your state or in your area can be useful, making sure you're using a product that has the right, has been proven to be effective. And then you're going to want to be compliant with using that product year round. All right, we're almost done here. If you do end up getting bitten by a tick, make sure you're removing it quickly. Remember, like they said in the video, do not use gasoline, Vaseline, nail polish, matches. None of that works. They are cemented in place. There is no way with that cementum that they can release their mouth parts willingly. The way that they release is they have to um, uh, excrete a enzyme that will digest that cementum. So you are doing nothing with those tactics, but delaying removing that tick. Remove it right away with a pair of tweezers or some kind of tick tool. Put it in like a little baggie or whatever little container you have. And you're going to want to save that tick for at least identification. Maybe you want to have it tested. You can stick them in the freezer. You can keep them in the bag. You can take a picture. Like there's a variety of things you can do, but definitely save them. And you can, note in on the baggie who it bit and what the date was. So mark your calendar from the date you were bitten and watch for symptoms for 30 to up to 60 days. So most things you're going to see within 30 days, but importantly, some of those blood parasites may not start showing up till a little later. And you could consider talking with your healthcare provider initially following a bite, or you could talk with them if you see any symptoms. So you're going to want to, just like this graphic shows, you're going to get really close to the head and those mouth parts. You want to pull straight up. You don't have to do any wrenching or twisting. Pull straight out and then wash the bite site with soap and water. So, what resources do I have to share with you today? So, maybe I've sufficiently motivated you and you want to share this with other people or you want to check back. So, again, the Ohio Department of Health has a really great set of resources on tick-borne disease. They've worked very hard to do that. If you go, you can Google to get there, or you can go to this. I like to use this myself. odh.ohio.gov/ticks will take you kind of to the core page here, which gives you an overview of tick-borne diseases. You have to scroll down on the right-hand side, and you'll see there's more info specifically on Lyme disease, Powassan, Rocky Mountain spotted fever. This Ticks in Ohio link will give you links to the maps and more about the seasonal activity and stuff. And then they even have an update on all of the pathogen testing results for mosquitoes and ticks and things here, cases, human cases, and all that. OSU has also worked really hard to put together all of our resources on ticks and tick-borne disease, also, other biting arthropods as well, into one place, like one site where people can find them, as opposed to kind of finding individual pages or fact sheets. And we've lovingly coined this the Bite site. So you can find it using this QR code. So I'll go ahead and let people take a minute and find that. You can bookmark that. Or you can Google Bite site OSU. But basically, this is a giant repository. So when you go to ticks, there's going to be information about each of those tick species we talked about. It'll direct link back to that Ohio Department of Health page for the most current map. But we also have a bunch of videos in there about protecting animals, like how to search your dog, how to scratch your cattle, what to do if you need to remove a tick. So we have all this information in one place. And we did mention at the start of this that we have a new service at OSU called Buckeye Tick Test. And this really came out of a strong demand. People wanted me to test their ticks to determine if they had a risk, and they needed that, in a time frame that would work for their medical concerns. So we built that. We built a laboratory that will test ticks and return them to you within 3 business days, the results to you in 3 business days. And importantly, our lab includes pathogens that are both important to people, but also companion animals and livestock, which is not very many labs do, because we wanted to do joint surveillance for both humans and animals. All of our tests is just one flat rate, and we do species-specific panels. So, for example, because dog ticks cannot transmit Lyme disease, it makes no sense to test them for it, and it only makes people concerned about things that they don't need to be concerned about. So importantly, we built panels that are specific to the species that you submit to us, and we only test ticks for what they can transmit to you. And lastly, we share all of this data about the ticks that we find in the field that people might submit, all of the pathogen data. We share all of this with the Ohio Department of Health. So this is Buckeye Tick Test. If you go to the URL, you find it. Please note it is not a .com site. It is an OSU specific site. So it's osu.edu. All right, and here's the end. So if you'd like to get involved, we do have some citizen science opportunities. My lab in general is really interested in complex ecological communities and kind of how they're maintaining these tick populations, like what hosts they're using, where people are encountering them and what can spill over to humans and animals. So we developed this really big surveillance network to basically source a lot of ticks from a lot of places. We work with veterinary clinics, we work with producers, we work with other institutions and agencies, we trap our own wildlife, we do our own environmental surveillance, but we have a big public tick submission program too. So if you are not immediately concerned about a medical, issue from a tick bite, but you happen to encounter ticks, let's say it was on your pants and you got it off, it was, not biting your pet yet and you removed it, whatever, you can bag those ticks, throw them in the freezer or throw them in some alcohol, could even be hand sanitizer to kill them. You can place it in a plastic bag or a vial, generally with some basic information, and you can mail it to my laboratory. And again, this is for research purposes only. We are not able to return information to you. That's what the other service is for. But this is, you submit it. There's nothing cost to submit it besides the stamp to get it to me. And our team goes through and identifies all those ticks and notes the date and location. And we use this to help the state build those maps and those seasonal activity patterns. And then the state reports that up to the national ArboNet system for CDC. So this is a really valuable thing. Again, my archive, we've logged over 37,000 ticks in the state of Ohio. And a lot of that is thanks to people like you who encounter these ticks all the time and care about us doing more. And with that, if you want to see more tick research and education and really want to push for this, we have an open fundraiser happening right now to support more work like this. You can find it on the Buckeye Funder website. You can just search for tick. I promise you we're the only the only tick named project. There is this QR code here, but we did just launch this, and we're hoping to be able to do even more things that might not be a big priority for certain funding organizations, but are important to the state of Ohio. So I'm going to skip this so we have time to answer questions. Some people ask me like what my lab kind of research projects are, and we have some of those here, but I think we should end here and I'd be happy to take any questions at this time. Thank you so much for listening, and thank you so much to my amazing team of students and staff who have generated all of this amazing information and made it such a pleasure to do science.
Thanks so much, Risa. Oh my gosh, it's overload of information, but it's great stuff. I think you muted yourself accidentally there. We do have some fabulous questions, and I am going to ask them in the order they came in because they're kind of about ticks, and then we if they progress with what you were talking about. So, where do ticks lay their eggs?
Oh, that's a good one. So it depends on the tick species and what habitat. So the black-legged tick, they like that canopy, wooded areas, and there's all this great like leaf litter. It's nice and moist and is kind of protected. So a lot of times they'll lay their eggs there. But they're pretty generalist if they find themselves, like sometimes people will mail me a tick that had fed and it's like laying eggs in the tube. So they'll do it when they do it.
Okay.
Much like you could imagine human delivery, they come when they come.
Makes sense. And both the males and the females bite, correct?
They do. The males do not feed to engorge, like to swell. Their goal is to feed just a little bit on a host and wait for a female, and then they're going to mate. So males typically they have these kind of shorter intermittent feedings, and for that reason, like people are less likely to notice them, and they're typically less likely to result in disease transmission. They
Okay.
can, but less often than females because those females are going to feed for days.
I gotcha. Okay. If a nymph is only as big as a freckle, how big is it after feeding?
Yeah, it can be like maybe the size of a pearl. You can imagine a pearl necklace,
Okay.
small pea. They can get, larger.
Okay. Well, that leads to the next question. Someone asked how big a black-legged tick is when it is full. They saw
Oh.
a rabbit with several fully engorged ticks on it, and they looked like small grapes. And they
Yeah.
wondered if those could be black-legged ticks.
Well, they can, but rabbits actually, there's actually, so in Ohio, we talked about five, and I kept calling them medically important. And that's because there's actually closer to 15 tick
Okay.
species in Ohio, but there are many of them that will only ever bite wildlife and not people and animals. So there's actually a rabbit tick in Ohio as well that really loves to bite rabbits. So it's probably a
Oh,
rabbit tick, but they get like grape sized when they're big. They
oh,
can get
okay.
really big.
Okay. Um, do you know any reason or purpose behind the markings on the back of the Lone Star tick? Any meaning towards it from it?
No.
Okay.
They have this variability. I mean, we have some idea of kind of what compounds deposit that coloration, but why they have it, we don't know.
Okay. Um, the legs of the ticks, they look like they were jointed. Do you know what kind of a range of motion they have in their legs?
We
Okay.
do. So they have multiple joints, and all of those joints have names, and all those joints have individual hairs and sensing organs. And we do actually have to look at those sometimes to differentiate species under a really high-powered microscope. So they can do all kinds of really cool, crazy things they have full motion with all of those articulating legs.
Wow. Wow. Um, explain a little bit how flea and tick pills work. If the tick is deterred by the animal's scent or taste, or poisoned by their blood, and if they do draw blood, how does the animal avoid infection if they need to be bit for them to work?
Yeah. So most of the products on the market, there certainly are some that are like repellent,
Hmm.
which is kind of essentially like it's exuding that repellent like from the skin layer. But most of the products are acariciidal, which means they're killing the tick upon feeding. So yeah, it's basically a systemic product that's circulating in the blood, and it when the parasite feeds, then it has a specific mechanism of lethal action in certain groups of parasites. So like a lot of insect, it's an arthropod target basically. And they take a little bit of that blood meal and then it immediately starts working. And it can take up to 24 hours usually to kill. Most of the time, to have a tick label claim, it has to kill over 95% within the first 36 hours. And so it means most of them were dead much earlier than that.
Okay.
So most of them are dead within the first 24 hours. And that really interrupts a lot of the transmission for a lot of these. So the pathogens we talked about today take different times to transmit. The one
Mhm.
that takes the longest is the bacteria that causes Lyme disease. And so since that one's also kind of the most prolific in ticks, you can really reduce the amount of tick-borne disease if it's killing within 24 hours.
Okay. Okay. This one's more fun. True or false? Do opossums eat a lot of ticks?
I love getting this one. They are very happy to eat ticks, as are chickens. They're willing to opportunistically eat them. But importantly, they do not specialize on them. And the study that comes from, they had these possums contained, right? So like they saw how many ticks they could eat in a period of time, but that was the only option, right? So
Uh-huh.
in a landscape of your yard, we don't know of any species, and they studied guinea fowl as well. We don't know of any species that can have a significant impact or actually control a tick population. So they may eat some ticks, and they may be parasitized by some ticks. So guinea fowl, chickens, possums also get ticks on them. So in a sense, they may deter how many ticks you're encountering, but none of them are actually like controlling the tick population.
Okay. Okay. Um, can ticks pick up viruses from humans, such as hepatitis?
No.
No. Okay. Um, why are black-legged ticks so prevalent in large cities?
Well, I assume that data is probably twofold. So if you saw in Ohio, there's like an abundance in Columbus. So when you report a Lyme disease case, so human Lyme disease case, you report it based on the address of their county, not necessarily where they encountered the tick. So sometimes you'll see high densities of Lyme disease case reports in urban areas because people are going out.
I gotcha.
Now, if you're looking at actual tick distributions, there are plenty of urban green spaces where black-legged ticks are happy to be. Like, it doesn't have to be a big contiguous forest. I think there's a disservice that's been done where we think like you have to go out into the world, like out hiking into the rugged, wilderness but no, like you could be going to the dog park down the street, and that's probably, if there's a tree, there could be a black-legged tick.
Okay. What about a test for Lyme? Can they give you a blood work and tell if you have it?
There are several different types of diagnostic tests for Lyme disease, and they're
Okay.
usually a blood draw.
Okay. Are they accurate? Do you
Well, it depends on the timing of when you get the test versus when you have it. And that's usually something like you have to work out with your physician. If you're really interested in this, the CDC page for Lyme disease has a whole like educational page for physicians. Like you can click their thing that says like physician diagnostic recommendations.
okay.
You can see their list of like, if it's this time point, this is what you should do. If it's this one, it's this. And here's this algorithm. So I usually just refer people to check that out if they're really like if they're concerned about this or want to know kind of the nitty-gritty about how
Hmm.
testing works because it's actually a pretty complicated process.
Okay.
That's the way to go.
Okay. Current treatment for pets, such as Revolution and other treatments, do they work for all the different species of ticks, or are they just working on specific ones?
Yeah, most of these products have a species label claim that is limited to some
Oh,
number of species. It doesn't
okay.
mean that it's ineffective against those other ones. It just means that there's not been like that laboratory study that specifically showed that within this time point, 95% of them died, right? So
Okay.
that it doesn't have a label claim against that species. So we just don't know if it's guaranteed efficacy in the other species.
Okay. This is interesting too. If ticks are infected by hosts, why are we not seeing sick animals such as deer, dogs, mice, and raccoons?
Yeah, so wildlife have probably been exposed to these pathogens and these ticks for you know, many thousands of years. So they did, evolutionary biologists analyzed the Borrelia burgdorferi Lyme disease bacteria genome, and they think it's
Hmm.
more than 60,000 years old. So that's 60,000 years of Borrelia burgdorferi Lyme disease bacteria circulating in nature. And these ticks have always fed on deer and on other wildlife. So they have co-evolved to be very tolerant of these things. So we often do not see animals sick from tick-borne disease, but there are some exceptions to that in some species. Um, and so there are examples, but few, where we can point to ticks as a problem for wildlife hosts.
Okay. Um, Someone asked if you've experienced any funding cuts to your work
I
recently.
have been lucky in where our sources have come from that we've not had like any of our current projects defunded, like taken away. But there are several pools of federal funding that we had intended to submit to going forward that no longer exist right now.
This. Okay. Okay.
We do also
Um,
have, I was going to say, we do
Go ahead.
have one. We were evaluating a new product in the state of Ohio to help combat Lyme disease transmission cycle in backyards and residential properties. And while not directly related to our funding, the company who manufactures that has been substantially impacted by the whole current landscape of funding and priorities. So there will be an impact on vector-borne disease surveillance, prevention, and control from the current changes to our funding landscape.
Okay. And we're going to be wrapping up here. If I didn't get to the questions, we can answer them offline too. Have you encountered any data about using guinea fowl for tick control on private residents?
There's a great study. So it was from Erica Mochtinger's lab. So Machtinger is a researcher out of Pennsylvania State University. And she did a study about guinea fowl on private property on a farm. And they were looking at how they impact tick populations. So I think it's called Release the Hens or something like
Okay.
that. So if
Interesting.
people want to look that up, it's great. But it basically kind of said, yes, they eat them, but
Okay.
not enough to control. Mhm.
Any progress on having a vaccine for some of these tick-borne illnesses?
Yes. So the Lyme disease vaccine has moved very well through clinical trials. Like I've been hearing about this for years, and my understanding is that they're expecting to release a new Lyme disease vaccine probably in 2026, I think I heard last.
Okay. Okay, great. Well, Risa, we're at 8 o'clock, so I think that that's enough. And we do have a couple questions we missed, but we'll get to those offline and answer people via email on those. So I thank you so much for sharing all this information with us. It's been a wonderful evening, and I think everyone got a lot of information to take in from this. So thank
Well,
you.
thank you all for having me and for the great questions and for being excited about ticks with me.
Thank you. I want to let everyone know that we are going to have our next Zoom in the fall. I usually don't do these in the summer, but I made an exception to cover ticks for everyone. This fall, we're going to kick things off on Tuesday, October 22nd. We're going to welcome Judy Semrock for her program, Voracious Vultures from Carrion to Conservation. And you will, of course, get details about that from the Land Conservancy via email. So thanks, everybody, and enjoy your evening.